at Cairo's city gates. Then he decided to venture north to attack the Mongols. In a passionate speech, he reminded his soldiers that the defense of Islam now rested on them alone. He sent messengers north to Crac des Chevaliers and other Crusader strongholds, urging that they join forces in attacking the Mongols in Syria, or, at least, that the Crusaders should allow the Mamelukes safe passage past their castles. The thought of cooperating with Islam posed an ironic dilemma for the Christian knights. It was the most crucial decision they'd faced since they had set foot in the Holy Land. With whom should they be allied? The Mamelukes, their Muslim enemy, were fighting to survive. And if the Crusaders joined forces with the Mongols, they might, between them, eliminate Islam forever. But the Mongols' invasion of Europe was not forgotten. A victory for those savages would mean abject slavery for the Crusaders. In the end, the Crusaders sided with the devil they knew. They supplied the Mamelukes with provisions and granted them safe passage through Christian territory. The Mamelukes and a depleted Mongol force converged at a place called Ain Jalut. The battle fought here in September 1260 was a turning point in the history of the Mongols, the Muslims, and the Christians. The larger Mameluke army overran the Mongols. It was the first time the Devil's Horsemen had been stopped, defeated. Ain Jalut means Goliath's spring, and tradition has it that it was here that David slew his giant. Anyway, it was here that the myth of Mongol invincibility was shattered for good. The spell the great Genghis Khan had cast upon the world was broken. But in the ashes of Ain Jalut lay not only the ruined prestige of the Mongols. The Crusaders' decision to let their enemies fight it out was, in the end, disastrous, though the end was some time coming. "30 years after their victory at Ain Jalut, the Mamelukes returned to remove the Christians. One by one, the Crusader castles fell. Crac des Chevaliers was one of the last to go. The victorious Mamelukes engraved their exploits deep into the castle walls. The Crusader presence in the Middle East had been brought to an end. The great Mongol army, led by Hulagu, settled here in northern Persia. As a physical symbol of their intentions, they built this stronghold called Takht-e-Suleiman. It was built around a deep blue lake, which the Mongols believed was a holy place. But what was more important was the great destroyers of walls had now become builders of walls. With the opportunities to expand their empire in the Middle East now restricted by the growing power of the Mamelukes, the Mongols turned their minds to governing the lands they had already secured. This was but one such center of government. Elsewhere, Hulagu built treasure houses, churches, and Buddhist temples. But those, unlike these remains at Takht-e-Suleiman, have long since gone to dust. From here, the Mongols began to rule over what was called the Ilkhanate. But it was a land in a tragic state. The irrigation system, much of which was destroyed under Genghis Khan, had to be rebuilt, and the land that had been turned into desert brought back to life. A huge program of construction was eventually undertaken, and soon the ancient waterways were flowing again. Water was brought back to the towns and villages under Mongol jurisdiction by the local Persian rulers. Many of the irrigation systems in use today date back to those times. Farmers and herdsmen were encouraged to build up their flocks, and across the countryside the land began again to bear fruit. Within just 2 generations, the Ilkhanate had become prosperous again, a legacy for which the Mongols are hardly ever given credit. But their greatest legacy to this part of the world was a piece of architecture built as a tomb for a Mongol Khan. This is the mausoleum of Oljetu at Sultaniye. When the Mongols built this in the early 14th century, they had completely identified with their Persian subjects. They had abandoned their shamans and their age-old tolerance for other religions and converted to Islam. They had, to use the modern term, gone native. It's one of the greatest architectural wonders of the Islamic world. Its vaulting and its dome were the largest and most complex that had been built at that time, and served as models for other buildings from Samarkand to Florence. By now, the local Khans had become Persian in all but name. Their courts and their laws and their language were Persian, though their allegiance was still to the great Khan. The Mongol rulers here were never conquered or swept from power. They were simply absorbed into the rest of the population. In the bazaars and mosques of present-day Iran, you can still see the descendants of Hulagu's army. From Tabriz to Mashhad, from Tehran to Hormuz, the Mongol strain is still clear, after more than 700 years.